First thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw a thing. I'm not going to really talk about throwing a thing. I'm just going to throw a thing, and then we'll make a lid. All right, so here's the thing. Your jar could be a cylinder. It doesn't matter what the shape of the jar is. What matters when you're making lidded forms, especially when you're learning, is that you leave yourself a really thick rim. And then when we make the lid certain parts of it thick as well. Because you're not gonna be able to measure perfectly and your lid just fall right in. It's a really tricky thing because there's a lot of little subtle angles and it's about where you're looking when you measure it. And clay dries and shrinks at different rates. There's a lot of little variables. So we err on the side of always making the rim a little thick because we can trim it on the outside or on the inside, depending on what kind of lid we're making. And then we always try to make the lid a little too small. The lid a little too big for the piece. So we can trim it smaller. Because trimming is a subtractive art, right? When you trim, you start with a lot and you end with less. So we try to make our lid too big so it doesn't fit, and then we trim it until it fits. So as an example, I'll show you the one that I made yesterday. In one of the classes, not a good card. These are all the recycled. This is a lid that I made yesterday. You can see it doesn't fit. See how it doesn't go all the way in? Right? This, when it goes in, it kind of stops. It doesn't quite fit yet. That's because I can trim this part out a little bit, make it bigger, or I can trim the lid, this part smaller, and I could make those two things fit. If you make the lid too small, you can't make it bigger, right? Because you don't add clay when you trim, you subtract clay. So we're always trying to make something a little too thick and a little too big. Okay, so my container that I'm making, and there's all different kinds of lids. So I made, this is called, I'll talk about the names in a second, but this is called a lid with a flange on a gallery. The pot has a gallery. We'll talk about it in a second. The pot shape doesn't matter so much, but certain lids are better for certain things, and certain lids are easier to make, and certain lids you throw right side up, certain lids you throw upside down. Certain shapes look better with certain lids, but they all work if you want that, if you like that certain kind. So, for example, let's say that I was making a round pot, right? It's okay, now it's round, or bulbous, and I'm going to make, in this class period, what's called a cap lid. Probably the easiest one to make, right? I made the 4 different other ones in the other classes. Tomorrow you'll see the other ones, and I'll have like diagrams, but they're all just different shapes that you throw. So for this kind of a lid, what's gonna happen is, I'm gonna have a really straight edge right here, like a really nice straight edge for like a little rim. And then there's gonna be a bowl that fits over the top of that. And I throw a bowl that's inside, goes right over that, and it's gonna be a little cap that sits on top. Now, this shoulder right here is a little low, like the widest points down here. These look better when the shoulder is higher. That's like an aesthetic thing. It'll fit the same way, but it won't look as nice. So then all I'm gonna do is lift up on this a little bit. And now, I've got a pot that if I put a cap lid on this, it'll just look nicer, okay? So there's a shape. Whatever shape you make, it doesn't matter. If you want to make a cylinder, that's fine. If you want to make something round, if you want to make a teapot, this would be a good shape for a teapot, but so is a cylinder. They're both good shapes for teapots, okay? So At this point, just a quick thing about words and lids. Here's a teapot that's a cylinder. Here's a teapot that's round. Cylinder, round. They both pour tea, they both work well, they both look nice. Okay, when you're making a lid, this is what's called a flat lid because the lid is flat, right? So here's a flat lid, and then this rim on this pot, you can see it as like a secondary rim on the inside that's lower. That's called a gallery. I'm sure there's different names for it, but the most common name for this is a gallery. So this recess is so that the lid can fit on the inside and stop there so it doesn't fall through. If it wasn't there, the lid would just fall into the pot. Okay, so that's a flat lid on a gallery. Another common type, and this teapot, I overglazed it or didn't wipe the glaze for it. That's why it has some pieces broken off of it. That's why I have it kept. This teapot just has kind of a straight side on it, so it has no gallery. But the way that it stops is the pot has a flange. That's what this vertical little cylinder thing is called right here. That's called a flange. Okay? And so there's like a right angle between the lid and the flange, and that sits right on top of the pot. Okay? It sits on top of the pot, so it locks on like that. Okay? That's another kind of lid. This kind of lid is what's called a cap lid, and it goes over the top, and I'll throw a bowl. Really quickly, just so you can see, you would never really need a gallery for this one. You could do another kind of gallery. There's 7 or 8 main kinds of lids, and then probably hundreds of variations that are like subtly different. For the most part, the two things you'll need to know how to do is you either leave your rim like this, nice and thick, generous, with a right angle, on the outside if it was a cap lid, or what you might want to do if you're making lids is you might want to split the rim to make that gallery. So I get the rim wet, I have the right angle of my wood rim, and I support myself and I very gently push down. You might go back and touch some more water on there. When it's wet, it doesn't drag as much, it's easier to hold still. And I kind of just split that rim in half and I push down slowly and gradually, and that makes the gallery. Okay? And then I might push in on this gallery to thicken it up so it's not super thin, so it doesn't chip. And that would be my gallery. Now I could put a flat lid in there, or this one that I showed you earlier that I was making, it is a lid with a flange, but it also has gallery. So like the idea is that I would trim this to fit all the way inside there, and this almost has like 2 measurements, 2 locks. This is really good for a teapot because when you tip it over, it's less likely to fall out. Certain lids are better for certain things. A gallery and a flat lid, when I pour this teapot, once I get to a certain point, this lid can kind of almost want to fall out, right? This lid would be less likely to fall out. Regardless, I'm not going to have this have a flange on it, or a gallery rather. I just want that straight edge. I want it to be a really kind of tight angle right at this corner. So I'm looking down at it, and that looks fine. I might just make it a little bit flatter. Okay. Now I need to measure. This is the important part of the demonstration, how to measure. There's 2 different kinds of calipers in class. Calipers are tools that are used in architecture, and design, in art classes, and ceramics. It's just basically a tool that measures between 2 points. Between 2 points, and it's something you can compare, usually as calipers are for comparison, or it's a repeat marks. This caliper is really nice because when you measure with this one, whatever the measurement is between these 2 points is the same as the measurement between these 2 points. So to demonstrate that, I have this teapot here, and I'll measure the inside of my teapot lid with the caliper. And then when I measure the outside, because we know this lid fits because it's finished and it has a nice fitting lid, it's the same size as the calipers are. And that is the same as it is in the teapot. And so it's the same measurement. It sometimes doesn't look that way, but it is, right? So this always looks bigger here than it does here to me. So when I'm measuring for my cap lid, I need to measure the outside edge of my lid because I need a bowl that goes over the top of this. I usually would not measure this while it's spinning because if you hit it, you might cut it or dent it. You stop the wheel, and I kind of pinch it, and that's my measurement. Now I made some little marks on it on the side. I can spin it and smooth those out, but that's my measurement. You gotta be really careful you don't move this. There's a screw you can tighten so it's a little stiffer, but if I hit this and I lose the measurement, that's bad. Okay, so I've got my measurement. If I go back on and there's those little marks there, I can just kind of rub my finger on it and those will go away. Now normally, what I would do in this scenario is you always want to throw the lid the same day that you throw the jar, because the clay dries at the same rate, hopefully. I would even take it so far as, like, if you're grabbing a log of clay, grab a log of clay and cut from the same log of clay your lid and your pot, because you know some of the clay is harder and some is softer. Harder clay has less water, softer clay has more water. It's like shrinking, right? The softer clay is like, shrinks more, okay? So, I have my second bat on. You'll notice I didn't cut off the pot because I might leave it on there or whatever. And then I've got a piece of clay here, and I'm gonna make my lid. And so I think this is probably one of the easiest lids to make, because all I need to do is throw a bowl that's the right size. Okay, now it's not as easy as any bowl, but I've got to throw a bowl. And so this is one that you technically are throwing the lid upside down, right? Because I'm throwing a bowl, it's upside down. A hard spot in that clay, whatever. Okay, now this is much more clay than I would need. I can leave extra clay at the bottom, and that way I can trim a lot more off the bottom. When you make a cap lid, you can grab it, or you can put like a little handle on it, a little figure. You can hand build the knob, right? Like this is like the knob. You can hand build this, you can trim it, you can wheel throw it, you can make it a handle, you can sculpt it, all different ways to do that, right? So I'm thinking about that now though, like how would I do it? First thing I need to do is I want to see, am I even close to my measurement? So I'm going to make a bowl, and you can see that's about the same width, right? And so depending on how I want this bowl to look, I could want it to look very rectangular. Like it could be like a cylinder that goes over the top, or it could be a dome that goes over the top. It could be all different shapes, but essentially it's going to grab around the outside. This looks about right. I'm going to go in. I'm going to leave a little extra on the bottom. So I'm leaving the bottom extra thick. I'm opening it. And then I'm going to throw a cylinder. So this one's got like a hard spot in this clay, I don't know. Doesn't really matter. Okay, and then I can measure it and say, okay, it needs to get wider than that, right? Because this is the outside. I need this to be the inside of my bowl. Now I want you to notice, see how thin the rim is? If I leave the rim that thin, and I don't thicken that somehow, when I widen it, the rim gets very thin. And remember, I want that to be thick so I can trim it to make it fit. So, when you're raising it, you have to make sure when you raise it, you don't squeeze the top too much. You gotta squeeze from the bottom, right? So I'm going from the bottom, and then as I raise it, as I go up, I lighten the pressure, and then maybe I pinch with my left hand and push down with my right just to thicken it up a little bit. Can't do a lot that way, but compressing the rim is good. Now, I'll go back, and I need the inside to be there. I'm getting closer. I can double check my measurement here, it's still accurate. I need that to be on the inside. I can use a rib, I can use my finger, but now, I just need to make it a little bit wider. Let's check it again. Okay, now it's really close, right? Almost fits in. Remember, I want to make this lid not quite perfectly fit. Because if I make it a little too big, I can't shrink it. If I make it barely like kind of sit on here, I can trim it and it will lock in. Okay, so I clean the inside up if I want, if I had a sponge, or I use like a tool like this. Don't leave water on the inside. This is about where I would leave it, because then I can trim this inside a little bit and it will lock right in. Now the only consideration on a cap lid that's unique to a cap lid is this has a certain height to it. My pot has a certain height to this little neck here. I want to make sure that my bowl doesn't get too narrow too quickly. So I need that to be also kind of straight. Kind of like that. Okay. Double check my measurement one more time. It almost fits in there. Really close. That's just right. I want to err on the side of it being a little too small, so I'm going to kind of push it in just a little bit. And that would be it. That's my lid. And so the idea is that this lid, once it comes off the wheel, I cut it, I trim the bottom like a bowl round, I trim a foot if you wanted for some reason, if that's the shape you wanted the top to look like. And then this would go over the top of this pot. Now I can check it like a really rough check. I don't want these to touch because they're both sticky, but you can kind of hover it over the top and see. It's not gonna fall off, right? You won't be able to see it in the video, but you'll be able to see it if you look sideways here. You'll see that would go right over the top there, right? Now it's not gonna go all the way because it will stick, right? But that will go over the top and that would be my lid. Once I trim this pot so that it fits perfectly, I can put my lid on and then trim my lid right on top of my pot. The pot will hold the lid for you. So you can actually trim the lid on top of the pot so you can see them together and make the shapes look good together, right? So when I was trimming this teapot, I first trimmed the sides of this to fit inside the gallery, but this lid was actually taller than the gallery was. It was thicker. I made it extra thick. And so then I trimmed the top of this down to line up with this just right, and I made it kind of curve in and then curve in again. I did all this trimming up here while it was in the gallery. And I would probably pre-trim the bottom of this bowl a little bit, but I would trim it more on top of this neck, okay? And so, a couple of closing thoughts. Number one, if you can, make them the same day out of the same log of clay. That's important. Number two, if you can't, take an accurate measurement. Even if you can, still take an accurate measurement, and it's always in your best, it's to your benefit, for you to measure how big it is. This looks like it is 5 3/4 inches. Is that right? Yeah, 5 3/4 inch opening, right, for my bowl. Now that's important for you to know, because what happens if when you're trimming this bowl, you trim through it? What if you trim right through this bowl, or it flies off the wheel? If you don't have the measurement written down, you won't be able to make a lid for this pot because it's already dried and your measurements won't be accurate. You need that measurement. So when you're first learning to make lids, I would suggest one of two things. One, measure it, take a picture of it, or throw this to a number that you'll remember. Don't throw it to 5 3/4 inch, 5 7/16 of an inch. Don't do that. Make it exactly 3 inches. Make it exactly 4 inches. Make it exactly 5 inches, right? And maybe that's a number you remember. A lot of potters only make lids a certain size. Like if they make teapots, a potter makes teapots, every one of their lids is 3 inches. So that if they break one, they just need to make a 3-inch lid. You don't have to think about it, right? You just always make it that certain size. But you need to know the measurement because you might break that. You might not like how the glaze comes out. It might warp. It might crack in the bisque fire. You want to know so you can always go back and make it. You don't have to start all over again. You just need to make a lid, okay? Last thing, when you're drying these, they dry weird. So this is a thick thing. This is a less thick thing. This is big, this is small. This is more of a closed form because it domes in. This is more of an open form. I put them in the same spot. They dried very differently. I've been dipping this one in water every once in a while, every hour. But this was bone dry when I came in this morning. It has already shrunk. This was leather hard this morning. I can't trim this to fit this if there are different moisture contents. Because if I trim this lid to fit when it's bone dry and it fits just right, this pot's gonna shrink more. It's gonna shrink onto my lid and either hold my lid so tight it will never come off, or it will crack the pot. Because the pot's gonna keep shrinking. So if your pot is wetter than your lid, you can't trim the lid to fit it, right? So drying is a tricky thing in ceramics. It's one of the hardest things to learn is how to dry things and how to know when it's the right dryness. That was the same for the hand building as it for you. If it was me and I was making lids in this class and I were you, I would probably like, if I was leaving I would like throw a pot, leave it out. I would put the lid in the orange room. The lid will probably be a little wetter than the pot, but that's better than the other way around, right? And then maybe you trim the pot, you trim your lid a little bit, and then the next day you trim it some more. Don't be in a hurry. Make another one, right? But like timing is the hardest thing. Once it's leather hard and it's perfect, wrap it in plastic really tight, no air in the bag. You have a week and it'll just be all the same, right? If you put your lid and your pot together like this and you wrap it in a bag and let me spray it and leave it for 2 or 3 days, if this was a little drier than this, it'll even out because you'll create an atmosphere of moisture and this will release water or this will absorb water to find equilibrium. It finds stasis. It just takes a few days. So another way to do it is if this dried out and this didn't, you would put them both in the same bag, spray some water in there, seal the bag so it's like a humid environment, and the humidity will even out and the clay will eventually even out. Probably 2 or 3 days is what it takes. That's what those damp boxes do also, right? All those cups that are in there are very soft right now. They were harder than that when I put them in there. That's the state of the damp box's moisture content after 6 months. It found equilibrium where the humidity in the room has changed all the cups to be the exact same moisture content. It just happens over time. So when you're making lids, measurements is important, recording your measurements is important, and making sure that both pieces of the same wetness or dryness is important. Okay, you're not going to make one jar and get it right the first time. Maybe you need to make 3 or 4, mess up, trim the lids. So if you're making 3 or 4, just say, I'm going to try to make all my lids 3.5 inches, right? And then that way, if you get like 3 jars and one of them's a little oval, you don't use that one, but maybe you have a really good lid from another one and you'll get a good one, right? Just try to make all your lids the same size if you can. That would be a useful kind of tip. Okay, any questions? Of course not. Awesome. That's it, guys. You're all done.
In this part of the video, I'm throwing off the hump, which means that I'm throwing smaller pieces off the larger piece. You can do this directly off the wheel head, and a few of the lids I'll do that with. But this is me throwing a drop lid that's going to go inside of a pot that does not have a gallery. And I'm just smoothing out the parts next to the knob before I raise the walls because a drop lid is kind of hard to get in there. As I raise the walls, I'm trying to keep them thick enough where I can trim them. And I want for this one, the drop part to go just a little bit below the cap of the lid so you can see that little ball. When looking at the pot at like landscape, you can see that I'm double checking my measurement, cleaning up the inside. When I cut it off the wheel, the difference with throwing off the hump is in cutting it off the wheel. You have to make sure you leave a little extra on the bottom, and that when you pick it up, you don't squeeze it too hard to warp it. So I'm just drawing a line, cutting it with my wire, and I'm on to the next one. This lid is going to be a cap lid, so I'm going to have a lid that's going to go like a dome. It can be called a domed lid or a cap lid. And this one's going to have a flange on it. So I'm going to throw like a little bowl, but then I'm going to push in on the rim. And so it's kind of the opposite of the last lid, where the flange is on the lid, opposed to having just the cap and having it sit on a gallery. This next one is really simply just a bowl. It's a cap lid, and it is just a bowl with a little bit thicker walls so that I can trim it to fit. Right, this next lid here is just a flat lid. So with a flat piece of clay on the bat, this is probably the easiest way to do this one. This is probably the easiest style of lid to make, or one of the easiest. I leave a little extra clay in the middle to make a knob, and then I cut it down to get it to the right measurement by using my pen tool and cutting it down. You can see I'm using the flat side of a metal rib to smooth it out, and I'll keep cutting it until I get it just right, and I can leave it on the bat. And then this one's easy to measure. That would go inside of a gallery. You can see I'm using a piece of PVC pipe to flatten the clay out. It's also how you might make a plate. but it's a really easy way to make the clay very flat. And then this lid here, you can say I kind of opened it, but not all the way. And then I'm making a flange on the inside. So this is a lid thrown upside down, and this is a flat lid with a flange. And this one could go in a gallery, but this one does not go in a gallery. It is just a flat lid with a flange. This here is going to be another style of drop lid. This is going to be a drop lid that goes inside of a flange. The first one that I made was a drop lid that just sits on the top of the rim, and this one is actually going to sit on the inside of a gallery on one of the teapots that I make. And so it's made in a very similar way, but I'm measuring it to drop inside of a gallery opposed to sitting on the rim. It needs to be a little bit more of a precise measurement, um, but it essentially is the same kind of lid, just in a different application. All right, so these are the pots that I made earlier. I did make a video of making those. I just made them. These are lids. You'll notice I made 5 teapots and 6 lids. I made an extra lid just in case that I could make kind of fit any of them. I think I measured them all to 4 and 1/8 inch in their measurements, so that I could interchange a few of them so that I could make decisions like I am here. Do I want that cap lid to fit in there? No, I think this pot would look better with a flat lid. So I trimmed with the cap lid, didn't like how it looked with this pot, and now I'm going to trim the flat lid. You'll see that I left the teapot attached to the bat, and I'm using the teapot to actually hold the lid once it fits. I'm trimming it inside of the gallery to make sure that it's the right thickness. And right now I'm just removing clay so my lid's not heavy, making sure that as I trim it, I want it to look nice inside the gallery. So knowing that it fits, I'm just going to keep trimming this down until it's about the right thickness to be flush with the top of my pot. If this was too wet, if the clay was too wet, I might push these pieces of clay together and they'd stick. So it's really important to have the timing just right. All right, I'm moving on to trimming a different lid. This is the drop lid that is going to go on the inside of a flange. So you can see I actually trim a flange on this pot. This was a pot that I trimmed a flange into. I wish I would have left a little more clay to trim a wider flange, but this shallow flange will work. So I trimmed a flange so this would fit in. And now again, I'm just lightening up that base and trying to make that lid look like it belongs with the pot. So I'm trimming it down a little bit. You can see that I keep checking the measurement, checking how it looks, feeling how thick it is. Um, Usually lids have a little bit of finessing. You can see leaving a little extra makes it easier to make small adjustments to make sure your lid fits really well. All right, so this is now the lid with a flange that doesn't go inside of a gallery, but just sits on top of the pot. And so I'm just balancing it on top of the pot, getting it to the right thickness. This time I'm trimming the gallery, I'm trimming the pot's rim, and I'm trimming the side of my lid to try to make the fit just right. I have extra clay on both pieces. Now that I've got it fitting just right, uh, then I need to trim the excess off of my lid so it's not super heavy. Doing some final touches just to clean up my pot. It is really convenient if you leave either the pot or the lid attached to the bat so that when it dries, you can trim it without having to recenter it. All right, so now I'm trimming the flat lid with a flange, the one I threw upside down. This one just happened to fit super well right away. There wasn't much trimming that needed to be done, just that little bit you saw there. I'll just do a little bit more fine tuning and then the lid fit in. So that measurement was very close. Now I'm just trimming my lid inside my pot. I could also just put this pot onto the Giffen grip uh, and have it hold my pot, but it's a really secure hold when I haven't cut it off the wheel yet. And so now I'm thinking about what my lid might look like if I want to have some kind of little knob or attachment. Okay, last one. I am trimming my lid with a flange, the dome lid with a flange. This one also happened to just fit almost perfectly right away. I put it in and then I'm just trimming it so it looks like the lid belongs. I don't want a really thin edge, so you'll notice that I'm kind of trimming the edges. You don't want it to look like they're all one piece. If you leave the uh, rim of the pot or the rim of the flange on the lid really sharp, they're likely to chip. So you usually want to bevel or round those out. All right. And these are the finished teapots. I did throw some handles, some side handles, and some spouts and attach those over the weekend. I did not shoot video for that, but if you need to watch a teapot video, I have those as well.